Good evening, everyone. It's Paul at the Garland County Library, and I'm here this evening with Jerry Butler, who is the president of the Garland County Audubon Society, avid birder, and regular guest here on the library's video series. And today he has a special guest, Dean Hurliman, who is a woodcarver and author of the poetry compilation, And Nobody Sees Them But Me. And Mr. Hurlman recently donated several realistic bird carvings to the Garland County Library, which are currently on display. You can't really see them there behind Jerry in the dark, but they're pretty excellent, and you're going to see some pictures of them here tonight. So please come and check them out. And welcome, Jerry. Oh, had you muted? Say that again.
I'm fine here. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great.
I'm real excited about this program. We've got something we've never had before. We've never had an author of a book that we're examining, and we have that tonight. And we've always had books that are well known and widely read, like the Bible and works of James Audubon and The Search of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker. But the book we're looking at tonight is a book of poetry, and it's a book that's recently been released, and it may not be considered in the annals of great poetry, but for those people who are interested in books and birds, it's mighty fine indeed.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you take over and give a more formal introduction to our guest here in just a moment.
Well, welcome to the Books and the Birds series. The theme for today and the book we're going to be looking at is Nobody Sees Them But Me. There's poems about hunting and about nature, about Aldo Leopold and about extinction. And so I'd like to introduce to you a man who I've become well acquainted with through this program. You may remember that we did the Ivory-billed Woodpecker program about in last August, I think it was, or September. And this man saw the program and was excited about it and sent us some wood carvings of Ivory-billed Woodpecker. And that's how I got to know him. And perhaps others of you who respond to this program, I can get to know you later as well. So, Paul, if you can let me, hey, Dean, how are you this evening? Now, Dean's up in Burlington, Iowa. How's the weather up there, Dean?
Well, it's a little chilly. It's supposed to warm up, get into the 40s tomorrow, so we're really looking forward to that.
Well, we've had some Iowa-like weather here the last couple of days, but it's much nicer today. The first thing I'd like to do is learn a little bit about Dean's life and have him tell us some things about him. Paul, if you could put the PowerPoint up kind of between Dean and I. This is now, where's that picture taken, Dean?
That's taken in our out garage here when I was working on a Sandhill Crane.
Uh-huh. And have you finished that Sandhill Crane?
Yes, it's now hanging in over to Aldo Leopold complex here in Burlington. It's all been painted and hanging up.
I see. Are there Sandhill Cranes in your area?
Well, I've never seen one. People I think have seen some around, but I've never seen any here. I've been out to Nebraska and saw them out there on the North Platte, but not around Burlington.
I see. Well, is that the biggest bird you've ever carved?
Yes. I think it was some 84 inches long and maybe like a 5 or 6 foot wingspan. So
wow,
it was big.
Let's see, Paul, if you say, let's see the next slide. This is the kind of what I'd like to do first, I'd like for you, is that the next slide, Paul, or is it one before that? Yeah. I'd like for you to tell me a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up in Burlington?
Yes, I've been a lifelong resident here in Burlington for 76 years.
And you went to elementary school there?
Yep, I went to a school called Prospect Hill School, which is the same school where Aldo Leopold went to some 50 years earlier.
Okay, well, some of our listeners and readers may not know about Aldo Leopold. Can you briefly tell our audience who Aldo Leopold is?
Well, Aldo Leopold is a famous native son here to Iowa and to Burlington, born here in Burlington around in the 1880s, I believe. And he also went to school at Prospect Hill, as I mentioned. And he became more or less the father of modern environmental movement. He wrote a book called The Sand County Almanac, which is really a fine book. And most people that are interested in the environment and ecology have read that book.
Did you know people who also knew him?
No, not him directly. I haven't. He died in 1948, I believe it was, at the age of around in his mid 60s.
I see. Oh. And after you went to grammar school there, could you tell us a little bit about your education and where you studied and how you've learned?
Well, I guess I had kind of an idyllic childhood, and my family often went out to local creeks and such, and my sisters and I would look for crawdads and often had snakes and turtles and that sort of thing in our backyard. And interestingly enough, I once had a bear's head. I traded I gave another guy in Boy Scouts 50 cents for a bear's head he had. And I later traded that for a bucket full of tadpoles. So, that shows you something, I guess.
Yeah.
But my family used to go nutting. We went looking for walnuts and hickory nuts. We went raspberry picking and mushroom hunting. And I was an Eagle Scout and a camp counselor where I taught bird study merit badge. So that kind of kindled an early interest in birds. I had to get up at 6 a.m, which was tough for a 16-year-old boy, and lead scouts out and about in the countryside looking for birds.
That's good. Now you also worked at a lot of different occupations and trades.
I worked at a number of different things. I still recall fondly of being a pothole specialist at one time. And so I'm very critical of the roads around that I see. They're chock full of potholes, and I wish they would do a better job. But in my education, I went to a junior college here and graduated from there. I went to Western Illinois and ended up finally at Iowa. Got a degree in English literature from Iowa. Went to Iowa State for about 1.5 years and studied in their fisheries and wildlife. In between, I had various classes at I think 3 or 4 other universities or colleges, some of them by mail, and a couple in the Army, that sort of thing. So I must say I got a really wide-ranging education in the arts and in the sciences, both.
Well, that's good. Now, I understand you're married now, and is your wife, Karen, is she there where I can see her?
She's here. And I don't know if you want to go ahead. Come on. I don't know which way. There we go.
I've talked to Karen on the phone, but I've never seen her face to face like this. How are you tonight, Karen?
I'm doing well, Jerry. How are you?
Good. Now, I know you were the person that sort of got Dean involved in wood carving. Could you tell us about how that came about?
Well, it was about a year after we were married, and we were living in Ames, Iowa, because he was at Iowa State. And he got a magazine on duck decoy carving and really enjoyed reading the magazine. And so, as a surprise, I ordered him a absolutely flawless white pine board. It was about 8 feet long and 10 inches wide. Cost me about $20. And then he had a draw knife that his father had, and he started carving that way. He cut the board into 4 equal pieces and glued them together, and then started the duck decoy. So that's kind of how it went.
So I can blame it all on her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she gets some of the credit too, not just the blame. Now,
You bet.
I read a story on the internet about you, Karen, rescuing a person who had
Oh, yeah.
fallen into freezing waters. Could you tell that, or would you want Dean to tell that?
Well, we were walking. We do a lot of walking outside. Prefer that actually to exercising inside. And we were over at Gladstone Lake in Gladstone, Illinois. It's an old gravel pit, and there's a nice trail around it. And this wasn't Christmas Eve, but it was the night before. And as we drove in, we saw someone ice fishing out there, and you could tell that the ice was not ready yet. And I even commented to Dean, it looks pretty shallow out there. So we were about halfway done with our walk, and we heard someone yelling for help. And we ran toward them, and she said, "He's drowning. I need help," And I grabbed about an 8-foot branch of a pine that I saw laying on the trail. And it was mostly dead wood around there, but this one still happened to be green. And I got down to where they were, and the man had already pushed his wife out of the water because they'd both fallen in. And he was still in the water. He could not touch bottom. And using the 8-foot stick, I crawled out on the ice and had her hang on to my feet. And then gradually we got him pulled up. But he was so cold he could hardly hang on to the thing. And in the meantime, Dean was calling the ambulance with our cell phone. And to make a long story short, he got out. So that's how it went. I'm really glad it worked out okay.
Well, that sure is a heroic story.
And he and his wife were saying their goodbyes. He thought he was going to drown.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
He'd been in the water about 20 minutes. So it was a really cold night.
Okay. Now, and now y'all have a son?
Correct.
Yes.
And could you tell us about your son?
Our son lives at a group home here in Burlington. He was born 3 months early, very prematurely, and he's blind and has cerebral palsy, and he's mentally handicapped. But he's a very healthy, happy guy, and he's now 40 years old, and we're very fortunate to have him. So,
well, I've talked to you about him before, and I appreciate how much care and love you have for him, and how much y'all do work for that facility where he lives. Well, Karen, thank you very much for sharing that story and telling us about your life.
you're welcome. Good talking to you, Jerry.
Good talking to you. And now, Dean, how do you spend your time these days?
Well, I'm finishing up on a flying curlew. I just got it done, and I'm working on some great auks. They'll be done shortly, and then I'm going to wind it all down, I think, because it's getting tougher and tougher to carve.
Oh, I bet it is.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on now that the public kind of knows Dean a little bit and knows what kind of person he is, and let's look at his poems. And I've asked Dean if he would be ready to read us about poems. Could you start by reading the one that was my favorite in the piece. Well, before you do that, could you read the title poem?
Yes.
Nobody sees them but me.
Yes, this is called Walking the Levee. It refers to the times, I'm sure you've had this same feeling. You're out looking at a bird, and you know you're the only person in the world that sees a bird at this time. You're the only one appreciating the bird, or that's how it seems. And so we're out watching birds, and saw a long line of geese, and I wrote this poem about them. There's a long line of geese flying high on my right, and nobody sees them but me. And they're yelping and calling with all of their might, and nobody hears them but me. And they're longing to tell me of places they've been on their annual southbound flight, but dark, ragged clouds soon cover the moon, and they disappear into the night.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Now, I noticed that your book has a subtitle, and the subtitle is Poems of Hunting and Nature and Aldo Leopold and Extinction. And so I've asked Dean if he would select a poem about each one of those areas. How about a poem about nature?
All righty.
Hunting, whatever.
Well, I'll read that favorite one of yours then.
Okay.
If that's all right. This one refers to a daydream I had about hunting. And the book kind of chronicles my hunting and moving from hunting to more of an appreciation for nature and birds and that sort of thing. So that's the first part of the book. It's about hunting, and it covers my kind of a journey I had, personal journey about appreciating nature. This is called Hell of a Time. I cursed the dogs loudly because they ran off this morning, and they're dirty and covered with slime, and the old Evinrude refuses to start, and I'm having a hell of a time. My new rubber waders have just sprung a leak, and my blood pressure's starting to climb, and the waterlogged decoys have started to sink, and I'm having a hell of a time. My favorite old duck call is home on the shelf. This new one ain't worth a dime, and the coffee is cold, and it's starting to rain, and I'm having a hell of a time. But my young son is with me. He's on his first duck hunt. His face is all wonder and shine, and this is as good as it gets here on earth, and I'm having a hell of a time.
Thank you. That makes me almost cry. It's so beautiful. Now, what about a poem of nature?
All right. I'll read you one about the woodcock. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the woodcock and his mating activities. My wife and I are fortunate enough to have a pasture next to our property here, where years ago we saw the mating of the woodcock and the sort of a dance he does as he flies very late in the evening, sometimes even into dark. So this is called the woodcock. They do this in the very early spring. Each early spring, a tour de force awaits a pasture audience. It's a ritual of mating, a kind of wedding dance. The dancer is a male woodcock who struts the twilight sky. All a twitter, he ascends a spiraling staircase high above his lady love, who waits for him below. Then topping off, he tumbles, warbling soft and low. Safely grounded, he breaks into an aria of paints to hold his lady spellbound with raspy eloquence. But I suspect that if she left and he was on his own, he'd mount the heavens once again to skydance all alone.
That's nice. And the people who've watched this program the last time when we talked about where the crawdads sing will remember that a young woman who could not read was taught to read, and the first thing she read was a segment of the book Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And since you attended the same school he did, and you've written a poem about him, share that with us.
All right. This next poem concerns Aldo Leopold, who worked for the Forest Service in New Mexico and Arizona. He developed nephritis down there, and he came back to Burlington at the age of 26 to convalesce on his porch that overlooks the Mississippi. The Leopold home overlooks the Mississippi. And so this is how I imagined him sitting on his porch convalescing. Sitting high atop the river bluff, this porch where Aldo convalesced, from here much cause and consequence is there to see if you are blessed with insight into managed use of land and water, loss and gain. And so when nature is amended, whether health or whether pain. Here Aldo found a double healing, his own, and from this sweeping birth, a land ethic which sought to mend man's relation to the earth. To see the world like Aldo, daydream somewhere from above, sense the message of the moment. We should not be at odds with nature. There are no battles to be fought, no victories to be won.
He was such a outstanding force in protection of our nature.
Yes, he was.
But all of our nature hadn't been protected.
No, he kind of initiated a lot of it.
Right. Now share with us your poem about extinction.
Well, I thought you didn't. I thought if we had agreed, I wouldn't read one on extinction. I have one here on the owl's conversation, which is kind of a tribute to your friend that's going to do the study on the saw-whet owl.
Okay, we'll read that one then. You have it, Andy?
Yes, I do. I have it right here.
Okay.
This poem is from the standpoint of the owl. The owl is talking to the reader of the poem, so you'll catch it in here that it's the owl talking, not a person talking. And this happened because barred owls, happened to wake my wife and I up at 4 a.m. in the morning several months ago, and so I wrote this poem. There were owls in the grandfather oak last night, critiquing mankind for its lack of insight. How foolish the saying, I see the light, while half of the world remains hidden from sight. Whole armies will march to a phase of the moon, or flying en masse to listen and learn from the spheres in the heavens, sounding nocturnal tunes, or the night courses taught by the owl in the moon. The world is not wicked when no sun holds forth, and like all here on earth, we play our part and provide for some worth. Let foolish mankind believe in its march, all wise and self-serving like some patriarch who thinks he knows all, but whose knowledge is stark. We are equally gifted. I see the dark. Who hears an owl talking must needs concede. If we could speak owl, we'd have wisdom indeed.
Cute. We're going to get to that other poem we talked about, Dean, but later in the program. Okay? Paul, if you'd move us to the next slide. If you enjoyed Dean's poems and you want to read them all yourself, the book is available at the Garland County Library, or you can order the book through Amazon. Okay. Nick. Now, Karen told us a little bit about the carving that Dean has done, and we've teased it a little bit. As she told us, he started by carving duck decoys. Now, what does this decoy represent, Dean?
That's a mallard hen.
Okay. And is she life size?
Yes. All of my birds are life size, as near as I could get them.
Okay. Okay. And the next one is what, Paul? Is a carving of a drake, a mallard.
Correct.
Mallard drake. You recognize the green head and the bright yellow bill. Now, could you actually use your carvings as a decoy if you went hunting?
Yes, each one has a keel on the bottom, and I used to take them to the kitchen sink and weight them properly. They're all hollowed out, so they were in two halves, and I could put weights on the inside. I used to glue weights in there and get the weight distribution just right so they would float correctly.
Yeah. And I understand that you donated a lot of your decoy carvings to Ducks Unlimited and places like that.
Yes, they have an auction here every year, and I donate birds there. And also, I've given a lot of birds, over 20, to Aldo Leopold, that Aldo Leopold complex.
I see. Okay, Paul. Now, I don't know whether you always wrote things on the bottoms of your decoys, but kind of the way I understood it, you began writing on the bottoms of the decoys and wood-burning messages in them.
Yes, I used to put, at the beginning, I would put snippets of gospel hymns like "O Come Angel Band, Coming Around Me Stand" on the bottoms of, say, a Canada goose, or "Yes, We'll Gather at the River," that kind of thing. I like gospel songs. And so I would put them on the bottom of some of the birds. And then later I started writing poetry and put those on the bottom.
Would you say that your carving emphasize or led to your poetry, or your poetry led to your carving?
That's a tough one. I think probably the carving led me to the poetry, perhaps.
Well, we don't, or perhaps you could look at this later. You could make out the writing from that photograph. And then you have another one. Paul, what's the next one? That's another one. There you can see the keel that he was talking about.
Right.
And he has written, and of course, on the bottom of the decoy, he has his name and the date when he carved it. So
one thing about decoys is that collectors are always lamenting if the carver didn't put his name on the bottom of the decoy, because then it becomes unknown, and they like to know who the name of the carver is. So
yeah,
I always like to put that on there.
Yeah, I would prefer the name on there too. Okay, Paul. Now then, we've talked about your carving of decoys, but could you tell us a little bit about your carving of extinct birds? Well, now, what bird are you carving here?
That's a great auk. And the carving of extinct birds started because of the discovery, or the tentative discovery, you might say, in Arkansas, your home state there, in around 2004, 2005. And I heard that news on the television, and it brought me to tears that the ivory bill could possibly be still alive. And I thought, well, shoot, maybe I should try to, carve. By then I had confidence enough to strike out and carve something more than just a straight duck or goose decoy. So I started carving ivory-billed woodpeckers. I've made over 65 of those, and they're spread out all over the South, and one's in Canada and various places in the United States, but mostly in the South, to individuals and some universities and a couple museums, and Tensas Wildlife Refuge and Congaree National Park and Big Thicket National Park and that kind of thing.
And of course, we've got a collection of them here at the Garland County Library that there's getting a lot of comment and views from the people here in town. The next one, Paul, Dean didn't make allusion to it, but over there on the left, you see a collection of ivory-billed woodpecker skins. This collection is from the Harvard Laboratory of Comparative Anatomy, and they had 96 woodpecker skins. Just imagine what we might have had museums and places like Harvard and the Smithsonian not over collected them. We may still have some of them today, but it's still important that people can see them and imagine them. And that's what I think the beauty of Dean's carvings are, because he paints them life size and in actual colors. And you can look at his carvings, and although you probably never see an ivory bill, you can see this. And perhaps if other birds become threatened, it's been almost a code word in the past. When we make a bird threatened, everybody goes out and kills them and puts them in the museum.
Right.
Maybe we can avoid that.
Well, my hope is that school children will see them like they do at your library there and take an interest in it. I sent some birds to a man in Sparta, Wisconsin, who teaches in a school up here, and he sent me a photograph back, and it's one of my favorite photographs. It's a young student there, a young girl holding the passenger pigeon on top of her head, just like a kid would do.
Yeah.
And I know that they have to play with them and hold them and all that. But the hope is, as they mature and they might remember that fun they had with that bird as a child, and come to take even more interest in it.
Yeah, I think they might well. And then the next photograph, Paul. These are the carvings of the Carolina parakeet and the passenger pigeon, both extinct birds. Both of these birds were in Arkansas in great numbers in the 1800s, and both of these birds died in a cage in Cincinnati Zoo.
Yep.
But you can see the carvings here at the library. Okay, Paul. Well, tonight is special because we have an unveiling of one of Dean's most recent carvings. And before they see what it is, Dean, is this the first of this species that you ever carved?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
it's about one of my last carvings too, so tweak it in.
Well, okay, Paul, if you could show us the video.
Yes, get that switched over. And not the greatest quality in the world, but you'll get the idea. Here we go.
There he is.
Voila. There it is.
Well, I only carved that, Jerry, because of the book you lent me on the Eskimo curlew, which was a great book.
Yes, it is a grand book. I'll be talking about it a little bit later. And the curlew is about 14 or 15 inches long. It's very realistic looking. You can tell he has it sitting as if it were in a block of sand, and there's a shell of a snail or some sort of mollusk, which is what those curlews ate when they were still flying about.
Then I zoomed in there to see the detail. Turned out a little better quality than I thought.
It looks good.
Well, this is the first public showing of this carving, and I'm excited that we can do that on the Book and the Bird program.
Would you like me to show that again, or do you want to move on?
No, we can go on to the next slide in the PowerPoint.
All right, get that loaded back up.
There we go. There you can see it and still. I took that when it was at my home on my chest that my father made. Okay.
And
Well,
would you
now
want
that
to read
we've sort
that?
of finished the book portion and you've seen the bird for the day obviously is this Eskimo curlew, and we're going to learn some more about it. But now I would like for us, you've seen the carving that Dean made of the curlew. And Dean, if you'd introduce the poem that you wrote about the Eskimo curlew and introduce it and read it to us.
This poem is written both in Spanish and in English, because we have to remember that that was Argentina's loss also when the bird became extinct. And you'll recognize, people I'm sure will recognize some of the different references to the wind and hurricanes and the lodestone and that sort of thing that I have in the poem. First I read it in Spanish, and immediately following that is the English translation. So it's called El Zarapito Esquimal, the Eskimo curlew. Tal vez los espíritus del fuego te dirán alas divinas. Perhaps the spirits of fire gave you wings divine to lure you from the Arctic tundra down to the distant Argentine. Miraculously, you learned to read the wind that held you in its sway, while the lodestone in the heavens would guide your perilous way. The aimless, jealous hurricanes yearn to cause delay. That span of boundless ether with hazards all around, you slogged with dogged eloquence. We struggle here earthbound. When wings begin to tire, this maxim drove you on. The flock's welfare is paramount, but each bird's soul's its own. Your epic story's scarce believed, yet it becomes the more profound. Fue para dos continentes un día te perdida terrible. It was for two continents a terrible loss that day. Sonamos nuestros sueños de una pequeña ave, pero son tiempo se desvaneció simplemente. We dreamed our dreams of a little bird, but in time it simply faded away.
That's good. That's a great device, reading it in two languages, because, extinction is not just a national problem, it's an international problem, especially for our migratory birds.
And he had one of the longest migrations of all, around 2,000 miles from the Arctic tundra all the way down to Argentina. And he had to cross the Atlantic Ocean in, what was it, a day or a day and a half with no rest, nowhere to go down.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And not only that, he was actually on the Arctic tundra. And when he started his migration, he flew east. He flew east to Labrador and then flew down, as you described, the Atlantic to Argentina. But on his northern flight, he didn't go that way. He flew back up overland over both the North and South and Central America.
Right.
Okay, Paul. Dean made reference to this little book, The Last of the Curlews. The book, and when it was originally written, only had 90 pages, but there's been an introduction and a kind of a afterword that's been added to it. So, but it's still not a big book, about 120 pages. It's The Last of the Curlews by Fred Bodsworth, and Bodsworth was an amateur naturalist and a newspaper man and a writer, and from Canada. And he's written the lovely thing. I once thought about writing about the ivory-billed woodpecker and using this book as my model and tell it in the voice of the woodpecker as he has done. It's he calls it a novel, but it's really not a novel. It's just sort of nonfiction biography, to my thinking, and it's a wonderful book. And this is the book, but we don't just have a book about this. We have a movie. This was made into a movie, a little bit cartoonish movie, but it's excellent. And if you can't read it, you can watch the movie. The actual movie that you can see on YouTube for nothing is 40 minutes long, and we don't have time to watch it in the program tonight, but Paul's going to show us a segment of the Last of the Curlews by Bodsworth. So Paul, if you could show us that. And
the book has a real bittersweet beauty about it.
It does. It's an amazing, amazing book.
And now it's time for their incredibly long annual migration back to South America. The land pulses with wing beats as colony after colony deserts its summer home. A powerful instinct warns them winter is coming, and they will starve if they stay. The young ruddy turnstone isn't always eager to begin his first long-distance flight, even with powerful instinct and a determined adult urging him. Hundreds of thousands of birds have now left and are in the air, winging their way southward in huge flocks. Only one bird still stands alone, unwilling to leave. For the Eskimo curlew, something is wrong, terribly wrong. Each spring, he has hopefully made the long flight up from South America. Each summer, he has waited, and each fall, he has lingered on, the last one to leave, because no mate has ever come to him. Around him, birds of many kinds have found mates and raised families. Why does no mate come to him? Why does he never see even one other of his own kind? Day after day, he protects his territory and holds it ready for the mate who will surely come very soon. Instinct pulls at him powerfully, warning him it is time to leave, but not until the last moment. Somewhere nearby, there may still be a female curlew. There must be. Hour after hour, he sends his mating call out across the wasteland, and always it's unanswered in the vast loneliness. Winter is approaching fast. The urge to leave is now driving him, compelling him. He can wait no longer, maybe next year. He has started. His long, lonely migration has begun.
Thank you, Paul. You can sort of get a feel for it, and I think the movie captures pretty well the spirit and the feel of the book, and you may enjoy that. Let's see next, Paul. If you go to the screen just before that, yeah. You can look that up on YouTube. Just look up for the Last of the Curlews, and you can find the entire 43 minute movie. Okay, Paul.
Be very good for school children.
Oh yeah, it would. Had you seen that before?
No, I'm thinking that's just the kind of thing they would have showed us at Prospect Hill School back in 1950s.
Yeah, that was. that is pretty good. I think I'm going to use that some more. We might learn a little bit about the curlew. The migratory bird is in the sandpiper family. It's 12 to 14 inches long. And Dean, I checked you out. I measured this bird you sent me, and I checked, and you got it right on the 14-inch nose, best I can tell.
Sometimes you get lucky. Rather be lucky than good.
Yeah. And it migrates from the top of the world and the central Canadian tundra to the bottom of the world, which is the lower part of Argentine from Arctic to the Antarctic Circle, and a very powerful flyer it is. Okay, Paul. And when it leads, it leads other birds, or historically it did. Since it's such a long flyer, long and strong flyer, a lot of the other birds like plovers and other sandpipers, or the ruddy turnstone that was talked about in the little video, they would follow in line with the curlew. And this is a painting by James Audubon that's in his book Birds of America, and it depicts one of the things about the curlew. As you can see in this depiction, a female curlew is dead on the ground, has been shot by a fowler, and the male curlew comes down to investigate and see what happened. And that's one of the things that contributed to its demise and the decimation of large flocks, because once they killed one, the entire flock would land. And so in Labrador and Nova Scotia and Maine and places like that, the birds were just killed and eaten for food, and killed for sport too, of course. Paul? Another thing that happened to cause the death of the curlews is when they began their northern migration, although their flocks had been decimated by hunters in the 30s and 40s, when we had the Dust Bowl in this country, they were flying up through America and in Kansas, and they had these terrible dust storms. And many people have recorded that when these dust storms come, they would blow sand so hard and so fiercely that they would kill the stock in the field and kill flocks of chickens and farms and kill sheep. And it happened in the spring, exactly at the time when curlews were coming. And almost no curlews were seen after the Dust Bowl years. And many people think that contributed, just as weather patterns and over farming today are threatening other birds, so it killed the curlews. Okay, Paul. And then one other thing is that this is a Rocky Mountain grasshopper. The Rocky Mountain grasshopper would have been an important prey species for the curlew in their northern migration. But in the mid-1950s, we used DDT on our agricultural crops, and the Rocky Mountain grasshopper is now extinct, and it went extinct at about the same time the curlew did. Okay, Paul. And just as we saw with the ivory-bill woodpecker, there were collections of curlews made when it determined that they were gone. And I don't know what museum this collection is from, but I believe I counted 20 or almost 20 curlews that were here in a drawer. They're probably still there. Nobody's looking at them. We don't have them on the planet alive. Okay. The last verified sighting of a curlew was in 1962 in Galveston, Texas, March 27th, 1962. Photographer and birder named David Blitz photographed this. And not only is this the last time it was photographed, it's the first time it was photographed. We don't have any other photographs of curlews. We have paintings of them, and we have skins of them, but we don't have a photograph of a live one. I went down and tried to get a photograph of that ivory bill woodpecker like that, but I didn't have any luck. Okay, Paul. And some might still hope that it might yet surprise. We may have some questions from the audience, Paul. I don't know whether we had people ask any questions or if maybe some of our viewers had some.
We had a few questions in advance. And some of these you may have already answered, but I'll be sure to ask them. This one's for Dean. Is this the only curlew you have carved?
So I actually carved 3 curlews. 2 of them are standing curlews, one of which Jerry has, and the other one is a curlew in flight, flying curlew. I don't know where he's going to end up. I'd like to find a really good home for him, but someday I'll find a good home for it.
I wish you'd send me a photograph of him when you get him all painted up and mounted.
Well, I'm afraid you might want him then, Jerry. And
Well, I would want him, but I wouldn't hold you to giving him.
I'd have to send him to you. Yeah, I'll do that. But I'm hoping to find a school or whatever.
Yeah, it'll be good. That'll be good. And other questions, Paul?
Yeah. Other than our library, and you mentioned this earlier, where are some of your other carvings displayed?
Where's it? Did you know where that person's at?
I do not.
Oh, well, they're hanging at, like I said, a number of national wildlife refuges and national parks. Most famous would be Congaree National Park. They have that on exhibition, hanging up in front of a large painting of a southern swamp. And at Tensaw National Wildlife Refuge, that's the last acknowledged place where ivory bills were. James Tanner did his famous study on them there. And then Pascagoula River Audubon Society has one, and Big Thicket has one, and where else?
Colleges and universities.
Lower Swanee River, Red River has one. Loma Linda University has one. LSU has one. Auburn has one. Cornell has one. All those places. Yeah.
I sure do. I sure do appreciate your dedicating yourself to making this known by people and making it available in public places.
Well, I appreciate those people taking them, because I was getting a large supply of them here. They were hanging out in the garage, in the basement, all around the house. And finally I said, well, why don't I just give them away if people want them? And sure enough, they did. And so we have freed up a lot of room around here.
I guess Karen likes that.
Yeah, she does.
And I encourage any locals that are watching to definitely come and check out the ones on display here. We have the 5 now, not counting the curlew.
I've got to compliment your Garland County Library. Just in general, it certainly has a number of programs. It's just amazing what you have going down there. So I think it's really nice.
Well, I appreciate that. And thanks to programs like these, we've made great connections like yourself. You definitely brought some intrigue to the library.
Good.
you have to kind of walk over here towards the nonfiction section, and not everyone notices them, but once they do, you can't unsee it. So we've had people come and ask about them, and I know soon after we made the announcement, I don't know if it was on social media or the newspaper that someone noticed, but a couple came here and they had been traveling from state park to national park around the region, and they made a point to stop here just to check out the models, the carving center.
And you've got to appreciate a guy like Jerry that puts on these programs for birds. He's got to influence a lot of people, all for the betterment of nature and birds in general. So it's really good.
Dean. Yeah. Thank you, Dean. Well, is that about it on the questions?
Got a couple more, and this one's for me, for you, Dean. You had talked about how you were wrapping up this curlew, might be one of your last carvings, but if you had all the time and energy in the world, are there any other extinct birds you'd like to challenge yourself with?
Oh, I kind of like the difficulty of the dodo. It would take an awful big chunk of wood to do it, but it'd be a real challenge to do one of them. But I'm not gonna.
The big challenge would be a moa.
Don't put ideas in my head, because
I just did.
I can't get them out. They stick in my head, and then I have to do it. So
we'll make a space for it here at the library. Was the curlew found in Arkansas at any point?
I'm sure it must have moved through there. It certainly. What's the next state above Arkansas?
Missouri.
I'm
Yes,
sure.
I would suspect that they were here when they were abundant. We get the long-billed curlew here, and it followed much the same migratory path, and we still get those, not in great number, but we get them from time to time.
You'd always have a few outliers that would come in, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With there being some still surviving curlew species, are there lots of false reports, just like there are with the ivory-billed woodpecker?
I think people report them every now and then, claim they see them. But there's another curlew. It's more of an Asian curlew that the people are seeing, probably, or it's called a smaller curlew, something like that. And
yeah, there's a European curlew.
That must be it. Yeah.
That if when you're looking on the YouTube, there's a thing about it, and they say there are only about 200 nesting pairs in Europe, but they summer in Ireland and on the marshes and the bogs there, and there still exists, but there are not very many of them.
And one more question for either or both of you. Have you ever seen a live bird that is now extinct?
No.
I think I have. When I went to Hawaii about 10 years ago, I hired a birding guide, and I went high up on a mountain, and I saw a little bird about the size of a wren called a alapeo. And the birding guide told me about its history and all. And he said that the ancient Hawaiians would look for a tree that had an alapeo in it to cut to build their canoes with, because the alapeo only went to trees where there were no infestations of insects. And but that alapeo, he also told me that if I came back to Hawaii in 5 years, it would be extinct.
Hmm.
And that's been 10 years ago. And I've got a good picture of the Elapeo, but I have not read of its extinction. But the state of Hawaii has had more extinct birds than any other continent in the world. So, for that reason, I think I have seen a bird that is now extinct and photographed.
Hmm. That's a great story. I don't know whether to call you lucky or.
I think I was lucky. I really hope I'm hoping my birding guide was wrong.
But I hope your luck doesn't hold for the bird and it becomes extinct. So
Yeah, I do too. I do.
Hmm.
Let's see, Paul. Is that about it? Okay, Dean, I'm going to wish you a good evening, and it's good to have you and Karen on with us. And I'll be talking to you by phone in the next day or two about another project I think maybe you could help me with. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Jerry. It's been a great evening. I've really enjoyed it.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Steve.
We do not have definite plans for another book and a bird program at the current time, but we do hope that we will have some additional ones. And but whenever we do, the Garland County Audubon Society has a new website, and Garland County Library, of course, that does a good job of advertising, and we'll let the public know about what future books, programs, and dates as soon as they are determined. If you have a particular book or that is a book about a bird or a particular bird that you want to know about, if you could get me that word through the library, well, maybe that might hasten us up to make a decision about what bird we would be looking at. And that's all that I have, Paul, but there's always the last slide. I want to wish everybody peace and birds. I'm Jerry Butler, your host, wishing you a good evening.
Thank you, Jerry, as always, for all you do. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for watching live or in the future. And this broadcast was recorded as for your viewing pleasure and sharing in the future. So please do that. This might be the best one yet in this Bird in a Book series. So stay tuned. Peace and birds.